The House Economic Competitiveness will come to order. Will the clerk please take the roll?
Chair Hoadley.
Here.
Representative Bonak.
Here.
Altman. Harris.
Here.
Bagol.
Here.
DeBoyer. St. Germain. Here. Grant. Here. Brixey. Tate.
Here.
Kofia. Mr. Chair, you have 7 members present. You do have a quorum.
Thank you. Representative Harris makes a motion to approve the previous committee meeting minutes from our September 4th meeting. Seeing no objections, the minutes are approved with unanimous consent. The House Committee on Economic Competitiveness will now hear from Brian Calley of the Small Business Association of Michigan concerning the small business climate of Michigan. Welcome, and please begin when you're ready, Brian.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, members of the committee, for the invitation to be here today. I'm Brian Calley, CEO of the Small Business Association of Michigan, not to be confused with the Small Business Administration of the United States federal government. That is literally the federal government. Similar sounding name, but we're a private sector association, been around for over 50 years, represent over 33,000 small businesses in every single county of the state of Michigan and every industry you can think of, and a lot of industries you probably never thought of. And it's what I'm going to share today on this report is how important small businesses really are to the economy, some insight into how they're doing, and then I'll be delighted to take some questions. So I appreciate the opportunity. Let me start by explaining that the Small Business Association of Michigan publishes, or our foundation publishes each year, an entrepreneurship scorecard report. So we're all familiar with economic statistics. There's a lot of statistics that are put out, and the top line economic numbers tell one story, but underneath it there's a lot of sub-stories. How are different parts of the economy doing? In particular, of course, our interest being small businesses. And small businesses are very diverse as well in size, from single-person operations all the way up to certain small businesses might have hundreds of employees, but are still considered small in their industry. That diversity really is a strength. It provides a resiliency in Michigan's economy. I'm going to cover some highlights and some lowlights from the most recent report. So it's published in the spring of each year. So this is from spring of 2025, but it goes back over 20 years. So we've got a lot of good trend information over that time period. Again, zeroing in on the small business experience. So all of this is on our website, and while I'm going to touch on some points today, it's about a 50-page report. So there's a lot of great insight that you can use and draw back on. Start out with the landscape. So there's when you think about small businesses, it's one of the questions sometimes policymakers ask is how do you define a small business? And we think of it in terms of stages and based on employees as kind of a base. There's other ways you can look at it. You can look at revenue or income levels, but employee count is a very objective way of looking at small businesses. And we've got here. For employer firms, so firms are entities that literally have employees. So we're not talking about sole proprietors here. That will be covered and included later on in the report. But for those businesses who have employees, some standard economic classifications are to look at stage 1, what is called stage 1, 1 to 9 employees, stage 2, 10 to 99 employees, stage 3, 100 to 499, and then stage 4 over 500 that we would generally consider large. So it may or may not be a surprise to you that the vast majority in terms of the business counts, we're not talking about employees here, but just the count of the number of businesses, that by far the biggest category is stage 1, 1 to 9 employees. If you think about it in the communities, every single one of your communities, whether you represent Detroit or Marquette, both of which on this committee, the vast majority in terms of the count of businesses are small. That is the normal landscape in every single community, 1 to 9 employees. Almost 82% of total businesses with employees are 1 to 9. And then the second biggest being stage 2, 1099. And stage 2 businesses is one we're going to talk a little bit about later, but particularly important to our economy when it comes to employment. So everybody's for jobs. I've seen all your campaign literature, right? Everybody's pro-jobs, whether you're Republican or Democrat. I think even like communists are pro-jobs. Like everybody's for jobs, but where do they come from? Jobs come from, if you look at this, we're talking about private sector jobs here, to be clear, but when it comes to private sector jobs, 1 to 9 employees accounts for about, those businesses with 1 to 9 employees account for about 13.4% of total employment. It's the stage 2 businesses. Now remember, looking back at it, stage 2 businesses make up 16.3% of the total businesses in Michigan, or at least businesses with employees. And they make up 37.6%. They are the plurality of employment in Michigan. This stage of business, second stage, it is where the resiliency and the most explosive employment growth rests. It is where the jobs come from when it comes to job growth, and it does tend to get left out. People think of businesses, especially in economic development, in 2 categories: startups on one end of the spectrum and very large on the other end of the spectrum. But when it comes to where does employment come from, it's actually those in the middle that are small but not startups. And so I just want you to if there's one takeaway from this information, is to think about small business as being something bigger than startups. Startups are really important. We love startups, and we're going to talk about new business starts. It's one of the pieces of data that we look very closely at. When it comes to employment, the biggest category are second stage businesses. All right, so we're going to start with the highlights. We've got 5 things to highlight, and then 5 things that we're really concerned about from this report. You're going to see enter on this now very small employer firms, which is are small businesses, the smallest of businesses, which are the self-employed. So it's an individual, one-person operation. And especially since the pandemic, but I would say very consistently over the last 20 years, that top line, that is the number of self-employed individuals. It has risen now to over 800,000 in Michigan, 800,000 people. And we're going to learn also later on in this report that not only is that where we have the most growth, but we also, those folks are actually doing better than the national average from an income standpoint. And so an important takeaway from this is there is this line of thinking that independent contractors somehow, like we've got to kind of quash the use of independent contractors, but really that's who this is, people that want to be their own boss. And independent contractors are one of the brightest spots in Michigan's economy. Now, this is more than independent contractors. It includes a lot of different aspects, a lot of different types of small businesses. But to us, these are all small businesses, one-person operation. Some aspire to be bigger, and some don't. It's a beautiful thing about it. They're building their own economic conditions and controlling their destiny, not as an employee, but as their own business. The next largest in terms of growth is stage 1 businesses, 1 to 9 employees, and they have outpaced the growth in the stage 2, 3, and large businesses. So the number of firms and the percentage growth in them is larger, and so it is a highlight. That's where there has been growth, and growth, frankly, very consistently. The next highlight, the second highlight, is looking business at businesses by size and looking at where does resilient employment come from. In other words, which ones go down during recessions and which ones hold up best in recessions. And I'm sure you're going to be surprised to hear this, that self-employed and stage 1 businesses dip less in recessions. It's actually a more resilient employment base. And if you really were to think through it, it makes a lot of sense, because the larger the company, the more duplication or scale in their operations. The idea of scaling down because of less demand for a good or service, they've got a bigger team. They can scale down without ending lines of business. Smaller businesses can't scale down in the same way without eliminating the thing that they're doing. And so it does actually provide a more stable employment base during recessions. Oh, by the way, you'll see these shaded areas. Those are recessions on these graphs. So you see a shaded area. Those are at points when Michigan was experiencing a recession. The 5-year establishment rate in Michigan has actually Michigan has become a leader on this. So it's one of the things that we look at when a business starts, how many of them are still in business 5 years later. And Michigan is in blue in this, and then we have generally the top performer and the bottom performer of states, and you'll see that Michigan is right up along the top line, and it's still nearly half of all new businesses fail. That's one of the reasons why entrepreneurship is, when a business makes it and is successful, we need to be careful to celebrate and not vilify it for its own success, because, well, if they are wildly successful, we should be happy for them, because there was an almost equal chance that they were going to fail and lose everything. And so it is it's a very positive trend that we see that Michigan's 5-year survival rate is actually up with the top performers in the country. Next report highlight is looking again at the smaller of the businesses, sole proprietors, and in stage 1 businesses over the last, sole proprietors in particular. If you look at that first bar chart, you'll see that 20 years ago, that was the percentage of total employment for that category, and look how it has increased 20 years later. There are more people self-employed today than before. And it's one thing to move in and so you say, well, is that good? Is it good that more people have decided to be their own boss, that they've left W-2 employment and they want to be an independent contractor or self-employed person? Could be solopreneur, could be that they have one client, they could have a lot of clients, it could be in the gig economy, they could be lacing together a whole bunch. There's a lot of forms that self-employment takes. But if you look at the next chart over to the right, you'll see that the average income in blue of self-employed people in Michigan is higher than the national average. And so not only is more of our economy moving in that direction, it's one of the few areas where we're actually outperforming the nation. So it's all good news, but all good, important reasons to support independent contractors and the self-employed. Another highlight that Michigan has made steady progress on is the proportion of businesses that are owned by women. We actually exceed the national average now, just slightly. But in 2002, and the demographic data and matching it up to individuals is always a few years behind. But a lot of other statistics. It's because you have to get information from 50 different states, and it's quite a laborious process to get this particular data set. But it tells a very positive story, which is that not only has the percentage of businesses owned by women increased, it now exceeds the national average. And there's a lot of areas where we're way behind. I'm going to show you some of them. We're way behind the national average. We definitely see this in our association. If you look at our board of directors, our membership overall, the people that participate in our boards, commissions, councils, and committees, we're definitely seeing a rise in women ownership. Let's now focus. Those are the 5 highlights. The 5 lowlights. It's not unusual that during times of economic strife or turmoil, difficulty, that you see an increase in new business openings. People turn to entrepreneurship more often during tough economic times. We definitely saw that during the pandemic. A lot of reasons why we saw a huge increase in new business ownership at that time, but we keep track of those going into business and those going out of business. And that's really where the concern here is, that while the total number has not dropped off a cliff, the streams have crossed. And it's a jagged line, it's very bumpy, but we put the trend lines in there. The orange line are those going out of business, and the blue line is those going in business. And those streams have slightly crossed now. In other words, more going out than going in. And that's something I think it's not fallen off a cliff or anything, but these sorts of trends are the sorts of things to really pay close attention to, especially with the context, remember, of where the job growth is coming from. So this particular trend is especially risky for Michigan because it is an indication of the most prolific areas of job creation and the most resilient areas during economic downturns that we see declining trends. There's another way that we look at this as well. Existing establishments, are they expanding or contracting with respect to employment? Are they adding employment or reducing employment? And this is another area where we see the streams have crossed. They're now in 2024, after a pretty solid period of expansions exceeding contractions. Now we have a period where there are more businesses that are contracting right now in employment than are expanding. And I know that there's been some controversy over revision of economic statistics, but I knew that those revisions were coming. I didn't know the exact numbers of those revisions. But we started hearing, especially in late 2023, that things were tough, that we kept on seeing these jobs reports that were really high and really strong labor market, and yet we were hearing something very different on the ground. And so starting in late 2023 and through 2024, the experience on the ground with small businesses, it looked like that blue line. It just was getting tougher, and they were having to really pull back or get a little more careful or be a little more careful on what they're involved in and their expansion type plans. And so these two things together, the private establishment rate, the going in business versus out of business, and existing businesses that are expanding versus contracting. These are two things that are concerning trends. Again, these aren't 2009 style, fall off the map type results, but trends that are undeniable at this point. Another one is it's to zero in on the new business applications, and this would be applications for tax ID numbers with the IRS. So that's when you see the word application, that's what it's talking about. And when you fill out that form, you say whether or not you're going to have you intend to hire employees or not. So there are a lot of forms that are for like a property holding company or something. It'll be an LLC, but it doesn't have an employees. It's an entity that's created. You need a tax ID number, but it's not a kind of a regular ongoing business like you might traditionally think of. But for those who file this form and say, I'm going to hire employees, like this is going to be a regular ongoing business operation, that you see that had really kind of leveled off, and again, not fallen off, actually not even an abnormal type rate for Michigan in modern times, but definitely lower than it was before. Now, how far will it drop? Right now, I would say that it looks fairly average to post-great financial crisis of 2008-9. But the trend, is this the bottom of the trend, or is this the beginning of the trend downward? I think that's an important question. We don't know the answer to that question, but the sentiment is fairly negative. And so I fear that this is not the bottom, that right where we're at right now, which you might call average, but lower than in recent years, may or may not be the bottom. Another demographic, we talked about women business ownership, minority business ownership. It has improved in 20 years. It's actually improved percentage-wise quite a bit. But if you were to compare it to the national average, it actually is quite low, about half. And that tells me that we are definitely leaving a lot of opportunity on the table when it comes to the benefits of entrepreneurship. If it matched our population, it would be 25 to 28%, and instead it's 18.3%. At SBAM, we're like evangelists for entrepreneurship. Like, we want every community and every in all different types of industry and every people group in our state to have an opportunity to take a shot at starting a business. I think this is worth digging into. Why is it proportionately so much lower, both in the national average and compared to Michigan's overall population? I saved this fifth low light for last because I think it is the most concerning, and I think it's worth dwelling on. Remember those 4 stages of business: first stage, second stage, third, and fourth. The growth rate in Michigan over the last 20 years, you'll see, is all those numbers are positive. The highest growth rate being businesses with 1 to 9 employees at 43%. And that's an impressive number until you look at the U.S. average, which was 54. And that's substantially less. But look at the second stage businesses. You remember when in the beginning of the report, 37% of total private sector employment comes from second stage businesses? And that's while Michigan's growth rate in the last 20 years was 4.8% compared to the national, which is 23.3. Imagine what Michigan's economy would look like today if we had a second stage business growth rate that looked like the national average. To me, that's the most concerning thing about the report, but it's also the area where there's the most promise. And so as you think about things like economic development, and kind of this overall look at the bookends, startups and very large, my main message is to not forget about those 10 to 9 employee businesses that make up the plurality of employment in Michigan, and also where we're probably leaving the most opportunity on the table compared to the nation. I have just the recent jobs report revisions. Again, I wasn't surprised by these. I don't think that there's any sort of conspiracy behind it, although I think it is fair to ask the question, why is the Bureau of Labor Statistics missing so badly? There's always revisions and adjustments, but the last 3 years, if you're to look at the slide over on the right-hand side, which is the total number of downward or upward revisions, you'll see 3 years in a row of downward revisions, but the last 2 have been unusually large. If you wanted to look at a period when there were as big of downward revisions before, it's because stats oftentimes are trying to catch up with economic trends. So if you look at during the big recession that happened in the first decade of this century, and that in those years there were bigger downward revisions because it took a while for the stats to catch up to what was actually happening in the economy. And so I am concerned that we have year over year over 800 and then over 900,000 downward revisions, but now the numbers more they more accurately match what our experience has been, or the feedback that we've been getting from small businesses, that it has been tough. It has been very difficult. And so on the left-hand side, you just see the original jobs reports and then with the revisions. And I also want to make sure that people understand too that these revisions are from March and earlier. So for whatever reason, that's when they do the annual kind of true up. And so the big revisions that just happened right now were 3 months of 2025, but actually you should think of it in terms of 2024. The 2025 revisions were to the year 2024 9 of the 12 months. That's where the revisions were happening. And then, of course, the year before, the same. So those are 3. And then, but if you go back the previous year, also big downward revision. Still generally job growth months, but nowhere near what it was before. And then we just pulled a quote that from a Bridge article just recently that I had shared as they were considering or reviewing in an article how things were going. And I would characterize entrepreneurs today as feeling exhausted. There's so many different things that are happening today. I said here, weary and frustrated. Whenever something is new is added, it's tempting to look at that thing in isolation. It's not that big a deal, but it's that new thing on top of the other 100 things that they're already required to do. And so the things that we hear mostly about when there are new and costly regulations, especially those that don't line up with the interests of the employees. Businesses saying, my employees are demanding this and the government is making me do this for them instead. And that it particularly hurts small businesses who lean into flexibility. Year over year, double-digit increases in health insurance, high interest rates, rising costs overall, uncertainty in the trade policy for those that source things overseas, and then also misaligned labor markets. All of these things added together, it's a pile-on effect, and so it comes with a certain amount of frustration. That's the report and what I have to share. I'm happy to stay as long as you would like to take questions. I appreciate again your attention and interest in these matters. It is definitely worth time to focus in on small businesses, and I think a particular or more intensive focus on second stage businesses as not being a nice to have, not just the proverbial small businesses are the backbone of the communities and pat them on the head, but to really understand they are the main thing. It's not a nice to have. It's the main thing in our economy, our small businesses. And so to the extent that that policies and infrastructure built around economic development treats them like the main thing, I think our economy will win.
Great. Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Callie. We're going to open it up to questions of members here, but before doing so, I'm a little bit intrigued on the entrepreneurship. And with that being said, what do you think has driven that? I mean, are these people leaving the stage 2 to be self-employed? Is it the romance of being self-employed, or has there been economic drivers? What can you attribute that to?
Yeah, great. So the when it comes to the spike that we saw in new business starts, traditionally people have been faced with a choice. Do I want to leave my W-2 job and take a risk to start a new business? The way that a lot of work happens today, you don't necessarily have to make that choice right away. Sometimes you can have your cake and eat it too. So more remote and flexible work environments in W-2 has allowed more people to start jobs while keeping a W-2 job in addition. So I think some of the new entrants, the relative risk of starting a business in that sense for an individual and paying their bills is different for some that are in that type of situation. And also during really strong economic times when employment risks aren't as high as they seem to be growing or seem to have grown to in the last few years, and certainly during the pandemic, the relative risk of starting a business is lower if you feel insecure in your W-2 job. And so it is kind of counterintuitive. You would think that people wouldn't start new businesses in uncertain economic times, but we find the opposite. People are more likely to start a business in uncertain economic times because the relative risk of everything is up. And so starting a business doesn't seem so risky when the rest of your options are also risky. So it defies a single answer to, and we don't always know for sure what the story behind these statistics. But at SBAM, we have so many members and so many anecdotes. You add up like ours pile into such big categories, like they really do mean something. They tell a story and can kind of add a qualitative aspect to some of the quantitative analysis.
Yeah, great. And the relationship between the stage 1 and 2, would it be safe to say that many of our stage 2 started as stage 1, the entrepreneur that grew to
Yes.
having a handful of employees?
That is the normal course. Very few start employment size in stage 2. The normal way is that it starts very small and that it grows. It's one of the reasons, by the way, why 1099 or independent contractors are so important, because when those very small businesses are looking to grow, they are not necessarily growing in full-time increments. And so they need access to people that are out there wanting to be their own boss and are selling their service. Like, I need a person to do this very specific thing for this many hours a week, or maybe it's not even based on hours, but on a particular service, and it's not really realistic for them to bring on a full-time individual dedicated person. So small businesses not growing in full-time increments is one of the real. How do you break out of that very small stage? Independent contractors is a really important aspect of breaking out of the very small stage if you choose to. Not every business wants to be bigger. And while we think of things in terms of employment oftentimes when it comes to the policy interests of supporting businesses hire people as a consequence of their business doing well and performing functions, providing goods and service. It's not that they aspire to hire people that's not the reason. They hire people because they have work for people to do. They don't hire people because they just wanted to hire. I mean, some might, but the normal experience is that you hire people as the work demands it. And that, I think that is when you accommodate the very small to say you've got all the tools in the toolbox for you to get to a point where the normal thing is you hire and you're expanding in full-time increments. But when you're a 2 or 3 or 4 person shop, even to get up to that place where you have 20 or 30 employees, that's an extremely risky period of time. And it's millions of dollars. It turns into millions of dollars in payroll very, very quickly. That's why oftentimes with small businesses that are pass-through entities, all the business information shows up on the personal tax return. People will look at the personal tax returns, and the vast majority of them with high taxable income are actually small businesses. But they don't. The business owner didn't actually get that money. It had to stay in the business because they've got the next payroll and the double-digit health insurance increases and the equipment investments they have to make. Any business that is growing, even when they have taxable income, they can't. The business owner can't take it out. It's very rare that a business owner can take anywhere near the total taxable income out of the business. It has to stay in the business. And that's one of the fallacies of looking at taxable income and saying, well, that person's rich because look, there's $1 million in taxable income, but they've got $8 million a year in payroll. And so that $1 million that they had to leave in the business as working capital is necessary for them to even meet the cash flow requirements on a day-to-day basis. So I think it's really, for those very small businesses, if we want them to grow into second stage, and clearly the stats show that, remember that the small businesses were growing, the 1 to 9 were growing faster. Part of the reasons why the total count of that looks bigger is because more are going in and fewer are getting out. You see, you think of it as a continuum. So it might be good for the 1 to 9 employees to shrink a bit if it was because they got into that next category. But if they get stuck in that category, it kind of inflates the size of that. But it's not for a good reason. It's because they got stuck.
Right. And the reason I ask that is I have some experience in this arena, and my business partner and I used to joke that, it's easy to be small, it's easy to be big, but in the middle is like business purgatory. You could go one way or the other. You're on the brink of disaster or the edge of success at all times. And I don't know if you've got the data points on the stage 1 and 2 business in the state. How many would you estimate of those size businesses there are in the state quantitatively?
Well, we have, if we go back to like the very beginning here, and well, I guess we do have it listed out as percentages, but if there's about 300,000 businesses with employees, there's over 300,000 businesses in Michigan that have employees.
Would that be classified as small businesses?
Well, you would take that number and apply these percentages to it. So I can follow back with the exacts on it, but yes, as you can see, stage one is going to be hundreds of thousands of the businesses in Michigan.
Yeah, and where I was leading with that was, there's a lot more small businesses than there are large businesses in the state, and I would ask you what policies could we foster that we could capture growth in these small and medium businesses, even that could you imagine if we could capture and have 10% of our small businesses add just one job? How many jobs would that be when we compare to these large mega investment projects that are hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars with expectations of a few hundred jobs or even a couple thousand?
Yeah, I mean, basically you would, if all of them just added one, you'd have hundreds of thousands. So I think it is an important nod to the overall environment. Providing economic development, like specific economic development incentives to this many small businesses is not particularly feasible. So why not just make it a good operating environment for all of them? And so that's where I think really it makes sense to focus the policies mainly on things like resisting new mandates. So if when we surveyed our members and said, what are your employees demanding first of you? What do they want the most of you? Number one, not surprisingly, wage increases. They want raises each year. Number two was health insurance. Health insurance costs are going up. I want more help with health insurance costs and make sure that my benefits stay good. Number three was advancement and growth opportunities. And while number four was time off, it wasn't sick time, it was vacation time. And so when you can come in and say, well, the government is going to put a particular mandate and here's a new rule and everybody's got to follow this new rule. For a smaller firm, the reason that it hurts them more than a bigger firm, for some obvious reasons, for just their kind of overall growth and ability to absorb the costs, but it requires them to take resources from things that their employees want the most in order to do a thing that's not even registering in what they're asking for. Their ability to be flexible is how they compete for employees, to be responsive to what that specific employee is demanding and wants, and to have the ability to offer it. So I think resisting new mandates and making sure that HR arrangements are as flexible as they can be. You're always going to have some baselines, requirements, some minimums that people have to do, but by putting high minimums in place, it means that the small businesses in particular cannot be responsive. They have to take away from what their employees want in order to do what the government demands that they provide. Also, simplicity in the tax code and simplicity in the regulatory environment. And to the extent that you do things for economic development, as much as you can do it by something by right, think about your homestead exemption and your property tax. All right, that's like an incentive. It's a benefit to people. Nobody has to tell you, I kind of like your kind of home and I don't like your home, so you get it, and nobody ever does that. If you own a residence and you live in that residence, you are entitled to the homestead exemption. Economic development incentive tools that say, by right, if you do these things, everybody who does these things gets it, as opposed to a process that say, well, you get some and you get some, but we don't really like yours and you don't get it. The more that you can create an environment for success around everybody where the rules are standard and predictable, and people know that as long as I do these things, then I am entitled to this permit or this license or this tax treatment. That, I think, would go a long way for small business, as opposed to trying to create, trying to take a certain economic development tool and say, well, can we Can we make it just apply to smaller firms, but it's still, you apply and you put all this time and effort and money into applying, but you don't know if you're going to get it or not. And so what small businesses, they can't really afford to take those kind of chances. And so there's a lot of really good tools and resources and things out there that they don't take advantage of because they don't really know if they can afford to spend the time on it, because they could do everything right and still not get it. And that's so I think from an economic development standpoint, economic development tools that you have by right, given that you qualify, and but then really focusing on simplicity and predictability, and trying to minimize the degree to which the government gets in between the employer-employee relationship.
Yeah, great. And we've got a list of members that want to ask questions, right. But I've got the gavel. So would it be safe to say, and I mean, in my conversations with small and medium businesses, there seems to be a lot more stability in the employment in those categories as well, meaning, if you've got 10 to 15 employees, you're typically not doing mass layoffs and hirings, in a slinky effect. You're usually steadily building, or unfortunately, you may have to lose an employee or two. But the trend seems to be a lot more stability in those.
Yeah, the data
markets.
Definitely shows that the smaller firms, while they go up a little less in terms of employee count during upturns, they go down less during downturns.
Right.
So in other words, they're a more stable employment base, which is the opposite of what people think. People think that smaller
Right.
companies are less secure,
I think they're
but really the data does not show that. It shows quite the opposite.
Great. I'm going to open it up to questions. We have Representative Tate.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Calley, for being here and presenting to us. The question, I had a couple questions, but wanted to just see if you could drill down a little bit. I know you mentioned, trade policy just in terms as a concern for entrepreneurs. I'm just curious, being from Detroit, Metro Detroit, obviously we have a new bridge coming online. We're thinking about trade. Is there any optimism with kind of stage 2 companies with trade, especially with our closest partner being right across, the river in Canada? How are some of your members kind of thinking about that?
Experience with tariffs is radically different from one industry and one business to the next. It's difficult to characterize overall, because some it doesn't matter at all to, some it's everything to, and in some will benefit from tariffs because they're in an industry that they need to that they need some sort of, or they benefit from some sort of cost protection in. And others, because of how they source things, they get hurt very badly by it. So it defies kind of an overarching experience. But if there were an overarching bit of feedback or response and frustration right now, it's that it won't settle. Like the trade policy won't land somewhere. And so 1 month to the next, they don't really know, should I switch sourcing from here to there? Should I invest in this type of equipment or capacity or vertical integration? Is it going to change next month and be something totally different? The uncertainty in it is the common bit of feedback. There are definitely some that are seeing some benefits from reshoring, but there's also, I think people are somewhat tepid on jumping all in on it because, again, it's not landing. And so am I really going to invest in domestic production if I don't know that this scenario is going to be here 6 months or 5 years from now? And, does it make sense? These investments often are so big, and especially for a smaller company, they can't afford to miss on one kind of missed big play. It's over for them. They can't withstand it, and they've got it's not unusual for entrepreneurs to have literally their personal residence as collateral on their business loans. And so when they're making these moves, they have to know that it works. That uncertainty is a big concern. So I think that's the most important thing the feds could do right now, is to make decisions on tariffs and leave it be. And there will be, some people are going to come out ahead and some people come out behind. That's just a fact. And But if that's the policy that's going to be pursued, the economy will eventually adjust to it. It's just a matter of you can't adjust to something that doesn't settle.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We have Representative Brixey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Kelly, for coming. I was a member of your organization for a few years while you were Lieutenant Governor, and I appreciate all the work that SBAM does. So my office participated in your legislative briefing call that you had last month, and I have, after your presentation today, I have two questions for you. So the first one is the budget that we passed here in the House, we eliminated $5 billion, and we're being told that those cuts were waste, fraud, and abuse. So my question is, do you think that the small business support hubs, $10 million, and the small business development initiative, $10 million, those programs, do you think they constitute waste, fraud, and abuse?
I'm glad that you asked that question because I do want to single out some activities within the MEDC. And I know that the MEDC is not particularly popular right now, but let me give you a name of a person. She didn't ask me to do this, and I hope it doesn't embarrass or draw negative attention. The person that's in charge of small business services at MEDC, her name is Amy Rencher, and she has been exactly what we have wanted to see. She's leading work that is exactly the direction that we would like to see at SBAM, and that is getting back to accountable, metric, performance-driven supports that build capacity among small businesses. It's not like incentive type work, but the small business support hubs in particular, it was born out of a compromise on the Ford incentive deal. For those of you who were here at that time, you might remember there was a big package that I think went in for money to go into SOAR, but then there was a different allocation that was for small business support yet to be determined. And out of that came something called the small business support hubs. Some of that money is administered by SBAM. And while it's a small piece, we're one of 27 hubs. So if you do the math, it's not, the part that we handle is small, but we have the unique focus of second stage companies. So most of the hubs and most of the economic development support is around startups. And there's a lot of organizations do some great work, and we have a lot of startup members too. But our focus has really been on second stage growth companies. And so I would really encourage you to look into the portion of the work at MEDC that happens under Amy. And I think you're going to be impressed. I think that you'll find that it is highly accountable, metric-driven, focused work that is that for us at SBAM has been a breath of fresh air. It hasn't been highlighted. A lot of people don't know about it. It's because it's not like the main thing that people talk about, and it's a relatively small piece when it comes to the budgetary picture. The original support hub program was that $75 million allocation. The governor's budget request put in $10 million and for it. So obviously it's being, now that they've kind of run it for a couple of years, and again, impressive, results-driven, metric-driven, focused attention, they're looking at it saying some of this should continue, but not 75 million, 10 million. And so I think you ought to take a look at that. I think it deserves your support. This is it's just an area that, again, obviously I'm biased, but I just think that I think that the MEDC would do well to make this type of work that you see happening in this portion of MEDC the main thing. For that to be the thing that they do the press conferences on and to highlight and focus is really, really good work happening. If you haven't met Amy, I'd encourage you to reach out to her. I couldn't be more impressed. I would say of everybody on state payroll, she's probably my favorite.
Okay, well.
Actually, you guys are my favorite. But as other
Thank
than
you.
the ones-
Yeah, you're not supposed to play favorites.
Good recovery, Mr. Kelly. Good recovery.
So thank you so much for that confirmation that those programs aren't waste, fraud, and abuse. Okay, my second question, your last slide that you had up here with the health care that mentions the health insurance costs. Again, I had mentioned we did that call with you. And there was a lot of discussion about the health insurance costs rising. And so do you see the, do you think that the upcoming Medicaid cuts will further raise the cost of health insurance and make it even more challenging for small businesses to hire or retain?
It certainly has the potential to affect overall costs. The reason why it's a difficult narrative to carry through, though, and the reason I think sometimes small business owners have just gotten skeptical about what's going to make costs go up and down is that costs keep on going up, and the promises of the Affordable Care Act, at least for small businesses that aren't self-insured and buy insurance off the rack. So, it doesn't really matter what their practices and wellness programs are. The rates they pay are the rates they pay because they're not self-insured. That they see these double-digit increases. So I think there's a certain kind of jaded response when anybody says, well, this is going to make it go up and this will help it go down, or this will keep, because it seems like no matter what anybody says, double-digit increases are just the realities that they've faced year after year after year after year. The principle of minimizing uninsured and minimizing the cost of uninsured being spread to the ratepayers is one where the math pans out. And so there's I think it's worth it, but it's worth it to make sure that you get the policy right, but it's also not a decision in a vacuum. And so, for example, if you were to say, well, we need to do this, and therefore we need to raise the cost of doing business in order to do this thing, now the math doesn't necessarily pan out anymore in terms of the cost to the business. So how you maintain things in the current environment is just as important as if you maintain things in the current environment. And so that's the big asterisk on it. In a perfect world, dramatic changes wouldn't have to be made. The state is in a position where it probably has to make some changes. I don't really know. I've got some experience with originally the health insurance claims assessment and then the insurance premiums assessment that came after it. And that was done in a way that in full knowledge of the federal government. Even they gave permission to do it. Now they appear to be saying you can't really do it that way anymore. But they said that before. Are they really going to cut it off? I'm not in those rooms. I don't have access to that information anymore. But I think that this question where Michigan has an insurance premiums assessment that is apparently being disallowed. They have been willing in the past to let the state get quite creative when it comes to maintaining insurance or maintaining Medicaid eligibility. I don't know if all those doors have been closed or not, because again, I don't have access to those rooms anymore. But I think it's worth checking, because you would have thought in 2012, when and then in 2018, that the whole concept of Medicaid HMOs having premium assessments to provide the federal match, that it was ending. Like, you couldn't do it anymore. And here we are in 2025, and it's still happening because you just worked out a deal. And so I don't know. I would encourage to look at that, to look at and make sure that all of those options are exhausted, and not just on its face because the feds say, well, this insurance premium assessment mechanism is no longer allowed. Does that mean we can't do anything, or can we just make some changes like were done in 2018 to extend it? So there's validity to what you're saying. How you do it matters a lot, and my experience is just because the feds say you can't do it this way doesn't mean that you can't work out something pretty similar.
Thanks for your perspective. I really appreciate that. If I could be indulged for one more question.
Well, if we have time, Representative, we've got some other members that'd like to ask questions. If we have time, I'll circle back to you, I promise.
And you got my number too.
Representative Altman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Brian. It's always good to see you. You actually just touched on part of my question, but maybe you could just expand on it a little bit. So when I'm talking to small businesses within my district, two prevalent things keep coming up over and over again. One is costly regulations, which certainly the state does have a role in. But number two, it is the rising health insurance costs. And so my question is, what is the overarching thing that is contributing to that? It can't be all mandates, certainly, but what else is contributing to that? And two, does the state have a role in addressing that?
The state certainly has a role, but I would say that there's a change in federal law that would make a bigger difference than anything that the state could do that I'm happy to share with you as well. So start though at the state level, they're basic. If you look at the claims experience for the two largest insurers in Michigan, and this is information that anybody can look at, aggregated, of course, not by individuals. You'll find that there are two major drivers of rising claims experience, which drive premiums higher, and that's the cost of hospitals and the cost of pharmaceuticals. These are the two big categories that are growing at levels that really dictate the increases in premiums. And so cost containment measures in those two worlds is important. There's not it's difficult for legislature and state law to impact those cost trends within organizations like that. But clearly, just more and more consolidation is at least correlated with higher costs within health systems. So health systems keep on getting bigger and bigger, and it doesn't seem to be leading to economies of scale, but rather higher costs. The change in federal law that would be really important is to allow small businesses to create their own risk pools, and they're called association health plans, or AHPs. And right now they're only allowed in instances where an industry it's available only to a certain industry. I don't know why federal law is written the way that it is, but what it means is that small businesses generally, or on a broad basis, cannot join together to create a risk pool like, say, the state of Michigan does, who's self-insured. The state of Michigan has so many employees that its own employee base is an actuarially sound insurance pool. And so they're organized not as a regular insurance plan, but under ERISA, a federal law. And it actually operates mostly outside of the requirements of the Affordable Care Act. And so it's one of the disadvantages small businesses have, is that they cannot band together and create their own risk pool the same way that a large, publicly held company can do that has thousands of employees. So there was a period of time, a very short period of time in 2019, when the rules had changed by administrative order that said small businesses can do this. You don't have to be all in the same industry, because it's hard to create an actuarially sound risk pool with just marketing firms or something. It's just, how many are there, and how can you bring them all together to do that? In those industries that could do industry specific things like manufacturers, most of them are big enough to have their own risk pools anyway, so they don't have an incentive to get together by industry. So what ends up happening is small businesses just have to buy small group policies off the rack, and it doesn't matter. They could have wellness programs. Everybody could be doing all the things they're supposed to be doing, and it doesn't help their insurance premiums one iota. So if federal law were to change to say that small businesses could create their own risk pools and organize under ERISA the same way that Ford or General Motors or the state of Michigan does, then they could both tailor benefits, institute wellness programs, but also not be stuck subsidizing the whole system. So right now we have a system that is very integrated into federal subsidies and federal support, and the payers are really small businesses. Large companies are not in that pool. They're self-insured. They're totally outside of it. They operate independent, and so what happens is the burden of the system falls on small employers, and so we found during that short period of time, SBAM, this is mainly developed before I worked there, but it was the year when I started was when this was really taking off. In 90 days, it went from 0 to actuarially sound. And the reason that it grew so fast was because if businesses only had to pay for their own risk and didn't have to kind of pay for the whole system, then the cost would be less. And so people flocked to it. It was challenged by something like a dozen state attorneys general. Our attorney general was brand new at the time and wasn't involved in this lawsuit, but other states to say, well, this is a workaround to the Affordable Care Act. And their concern in the lawsuit was to say, look, by doing this, you're taking people out of this risk pool, and they don't have to follow all the same rules. In other words, they have all the same rights and privileges of a large corporation, but that was offensive to some people because somebody has to pay for the system, and that's really stuck on smalls. So I think that expansion of association health plans, and that doesn't mean like Small Business Association of Michigan. It really just means small businesses joining together to associate together to create their own risk pools. That I think is probably the most direct thing that government could do. Allow for that. It's a federal law change. Essentially allows small businesses to be covered under ERISA or to operate and form pools under ERISA. It would at least take the edge off the growth rates that people are experiencing.
Sure. Well, I certainly hope that we will see some federal changes that would allow small businesses to create their own risk pool. I don't know how bad it has to get before lawmakers are pounding their fist on the table demanding change, but it's certainly unsustainable. And if the federal government could address that, that would be a great start. And then maybe talk about the dangerous trend of hospital consolidation and how damaging that is to the state as well. So thank you for your input. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I've been speaking a lot lately about the drivers within the claims experience, and I feel like people really do zero in on pharmaceuticals, and that is a big one. But I think we'd be remiss if we didn't recognize that it's health system consolidation and pharmaceuticals that are driving these costs up.
Oh, and not only that, but the consolidation is concerning regarding access to healthcare, at least in my neck of the woods. So just big concerns all the way around.
Right. Thank you.
Minority Vice Chair Grant.
Thank you, Chair. My question has been touched on a little bit, but we've seen recommendations come out from the governor's office, the Senate, and the majority in the House for the Leo budget, and it touches on many different programs that affect small businesses. I think you made a really good point, because I was going to say that I think over the last 5 years, not only as a small business owner, but as someone working in my community to support small businesses, I have seen actually some really good programs come forth, and it looks like we're having more of a focus on small businesses and doing some things that will really put us in a good place if they're given time to actually see an impact. So with the different recommendations that you're seeing, I'm sure you've taken a look at all three of them. Are there certain programs that you're really seeing have an impact on small businesses, really be supportive, that you would like to see us continue to invest in? Or are there things that you would like to see pivot? I say this every time I have the opportunity. I believe that personally, this is just personal belief, but I believe that we are in a recession. And I know that some of the first places that you see it starts at the local level with the small businesses. Like, you might talk to other people and they're like, no, not yet, maybe. But if you walk into the door of a small business owner and say, like, what are you feeling? What are you seeing? They're like, yeah, people aren't spending as much. People aren't doing as much. You know, like they feel it first. And so as in my eye, when I see that, I'm looking at how can we help to insulate that small business community? How can we try to protect them from impact? Because that is where the jobs are. That is, where our communities will feel the impact the most. So I'm really interested in hearing, based on the recommendations that you've seen roll out, what are you hoping that we preserve and continue to invest in?
Yeah, well, let me start. Thank you, Representative. And I would agree that the small business experience sounds very different than the kind of top line economic stats have shown. And even in places like in your district, which is one of the the hottest economies in the state, even in places like that, you hear a different type of sentiment than what we're used to in West Michigan. So the first thing I would say is it's so important in these times when you're facing uncertain economic times or difficulties to not place the burden on small businesses. In other words, first, do no harm. And when I say that, it's like when you look at it and say, well, when there's struggles in the economy or there's risks of recession, then sometimes the knee-jerk reaction is, well, we've got to preserve certain things, so like businesses just got to pay more, or we've got to do this thing to control the way that businesses respond to a recession, but it ends up making it harder for them to stay in business, and so you have an overall more negative outcome than you otherwise would have. And so the first thing is do no harm. Really resist taking it out on the people that are providing the jobs, and resisting adding new requirements and expectations on them during these times. And then when it comes to like the programs, there are certain things like Going Pro have been around for so long that many businesses, they know what it is, how to apply for it, and they know what their chances are of being successful with it are. There are so many things, though, that are done that businesses don't necessarily even know about, and they're not willing to take the chance because at the end of the day, it's not something where they know for sure, if I do these things, I'm guaranteed to get it. And so they can't afford to spend the time on it. So I think that's if there was a request or a thing to change in the way that when you're trying to help a business, the more that you can create conditions where access to the thing that you're trying to do to help them is guaranteed, or they know for sure going in, I either qualify for this or don't, then the utilization will be higher. There's so many of these things that they're good. They really are good ideas, but the utilization is really low. Going Pro is the exception, and I think that you ought to continue. And in fact, I think you ought to just. It's all good. It's a partnership between usually between community colleges, but other training institutions and business. It's a direct kind of demand response program. There is no wasted dollars in it because it's just the way that it's built. That's a great model, and so I would probably put that number one, or definitely very high on the list of things in the Leo budget to make sure are maintained and continued.
Great, thank you. We're going to circle back real quick, Representative Brixey. Go ahead.
You. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Although I don't want to end on a sad note. I wanted you to talk to us a little bit about retail. And, I think everyone in the world probably saw retail, the face of retail businesses dramatically changed during COVID because of Amazon, and those patterns have continued for people shopping. Is there anything good on the retail front, or is it kind of the same continued
Yeah, the so small retail, I would say, is the most at risk category in the small business community that has struggled, just even during fairly good economic times, still has struggled to expand in the buying habits and just the way that commerce happens these days with consumers has moved, and it's not that small retailers can't or aren't online. It's online is a very crowded place. How you get into somebody's purview online is something that it's not a place that small business owners can really be creative and just like get there. It's that's a very controlled environment where you essentially pay to play.
Right.
And so the small retail is the most at risk. I will say that those that are doing well are those that have really focused or moved away from anything that feels or looks or smells like a commodity and is something very specialized. So and those that have that are able to develop followings. So I know of a social enterprise that has bath and body products that they sell online, and they're made by people with disabilities, and there's a very loyal following, and so their sales trends have been really strong. You can look at just to give a couple of examples of I've seen some really creative work on from a very famous small business in Michigan that sells online and also in stores. Stormy Cromer had launched a collegiate license product line, and it has really taken off. And those sorts of kind of like specialty focuses can drive activity, and but retail has gotten very, very difficult. And I think that those that are starting to figure out how to survive are the ones that have embraced the fact that the world is not going to go back to how it was before. This is the way that it works today. And so given that fact, where do I fit in it? And unfortunately, there are many that have gone out of business because just the way that they did it, the foot traffic that used to be there to create a certain base of business just doesn't exist anymore.
Great. Thank you, members, for those thought-provoking questions. Good stuff. We can move forward with that. And as we wrap this up, I mean, everybody understands we're operating in a global economy now, and we understand that it's impossible to really compete with countries with nothing less than slave labor and a lot of other abusive employment practices. So bringing it back home, what are other states doing that we could either emulate or learn from, or where we're maybe having them eat our lunch?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. It's a great way to think of it. As you're looking at policy questions before you, I think it is important to think in terms of what is the normal practice or the competitive practice that's happening around so there's two ways of looking at it. You can try to get to number one, but the last thing you want to do is to do something that's completely different from everybody else. Because what happens, you might think, well, it's different but better. But in most cases, when it comes to investment decisions, normal things, like, for example, in Michigan, your tax code, you take the federal tax base, and it just gets plugged into your personal tax return or your corporate tax return. Like, that's a normal way of doing it. 40 states do it that way. And so that's an important feature. It's a simplicity feature, and it's like a normalcy type of a feature. The more that you can assure that Michigan is operating in a way that is predictable and standard and regular, the better. When it comes to the regulatory environment, I can't stress enough that that to the extent that it can be made into a process where you know the outcome before you start, It's very clear. Here's what I got to do. As long as I do these things, I am entitled to the outcome of a permit or a license or whatever. And and you know how long it's going to take. I think there's probably some, not probably, there's definitely some opportunity for technological improvements where people can maybe do more without waiting for somebody in the government to do it. You know, these systems are getting better and better. So I've met the requirements to practice as a licensed professional in this field. Here are my credentials. I mean, if the IRS can give you a tax ID number in 30 seconds, which they can, right? So you put in the information, as long as you put it all in, this is what you're supposed to, it spits back out the number. Wouldn't it be great to have that sort of system? I need this permit or I need this license. I'm going to put the information in, and the system's smart enough to say, yep, you turned all the information in. By right, you are entitled to this outcome, and you just get it. You know, that sort of thing. It takes uncertainty and unproductive time out of the entrepreneur's day. But I can't stress enough, during these times, do no harm being the first order of business. When we were talking about the Growing Michigan Get Together Council, it's kind of a broken record, and you say, well, how do we get people to move back to Michigan? It's like, wait, that's not the right question. The first question is, how do we get people to stay in Michigan that are already here? And then after you answer that robustly and are successful with it, then the case for moving back is a whole different question. And I think approaching a lot of public policy that way makes sense, or most of public policy makes sense. The question isn't how can we convince some business from someplace else in the world to come in here and save us. That's not the right question. The question is how can we build an environment of success around the ones that are already here? They're the best bet. And if you look at where our employment comes from, existing companies getting bigger, that's the majority of it. Relocations and startups both can be positive forces, but year over year over year over year, the number one is an existing company just getting a little bigger.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I don't think we can utilize subsidy as a substitute for a healthy, sustainable business environment. So I truly thank you for your presentation today, and for the members for, again, those thought-provoking questions. And thank you again. Look forward to following up and moving the ball forward as everyone here wants this state to succeed. So thank you so much, Mr. Calley, for coming in today.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. Seeing no further questions, Representative Outman moves to excuse all absent members. There being no objection, all absent members are excused. There being no further business before the committee will stand adjourned.